Hi, I'm Cynthia Nichols, the Regional Public Engagement Specialist for the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. Thanks for joining us on today's Views from Ukraine, where we'll be discussing the women warriors of Ukraine. After 45 minutes, our panel will go to private breakout rooms to answer questions from the media in attendance. As a reminder, the panel is recorded and streamed on the Embassy Kyiv's social media, but the breakout rooms are not. All conversations are on the record. If you are in our main Zoom session, please remember to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras. And if our panelists lose internet during this program, please wait just a moment as they attempt to rejoin. Just like all of our Views from Ukraine programs, the statements of the speakers do not necessarily reflect the positions of the U.S. government. This program is designed to give Ukrainians an opportunity to speak for themselves on important topics. As part of Women's History Month, we want to feature the women of Ukraine and share their stories on how they are fighting for their country. On our panel today, we're featuring a woman fighting to save the cultural heritage of Ukraine, a woman who fights to rebuild her community through international partnerships, and a woman fighting to heal Ukraine through volunteerism. Although these women are fighting for Ukraine in different ways, they are all warriors that have stepped up in this battle. Let's first start a conversation with Luciana Shrum, who is fighting to save the cultural heritage of Ukraine. Luciana, you are the executive director of the Library Country Foundation, which is raising funds to help save the libraries of Ukraine. Can you tell us about the impact that this war has had on the libraries as well as the cultural heritage in Ukraine?
Yes, thank you. And I can say that since the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation to Ukraine, it's about 1,300 cultural objects in Ukraine have been seriously damaged or even destroyed. And among them, it's 63 museums, 300 religious buildings and churches, and unfortunately 508 libraries already. So that means that thousands of works of art were damaged by Russian bombings, and collections of books. For now, 42 libraries lost all their library collections. I mean books. And also there are at least 20 university libraries damaged, for example, in Irpin, in Kharkiv, Mariupol. So there are also national architectural monuments, so museums, as I told. And there are many testimonies of Russian troops destroying books. So they are like burning books, especially on the history of Ukraine. And I saw this on my eyes. For example, in Kyiv region, I visited the territory that was occupied. It's Ivankiv community, and in one of the library, I saw these books that were shot by the guns. So really, there are a huge impact on the culture of Ukraine, unfortunately.
It's unfortunate. Could you tell us how the libraries are becoming community hubs for internally displaced people? It seems like the libraries are really stepping up despite these massive hurdles that are being placed in front of them. Do you tell us about that?
Yes, we can speak that on the other hand, libraries contribute, we can say that they contribute to Ukraine's victory because they have got the new roles in public life. For example, they become shelters for internally displaced Ukrainians. They become humanitarian centers, volunteer centers. And there are many such examples in large cities, especially Lviv, Poltava, Odessa, Lutsk, Rivne, etc., and also in small towns and villages as well. And what do they exactly do? They collect humanitarian aid for displaced Ukrainians, for example. They collect medicines, they provide consultations to displaced Ukrainians, and they do lots of things now. And also, they perform their direct functions by working with the community through books. They're doing like master classes and some leisure activities for children. So they are doing a lot of things to help Ukrainians in this situation.
Mm. If I recall correctly, you also had to flee your home during the start of the war. So the work that you're doing must be extremely personal. Personal. How have you been able to dedicate yourself to saving Ukraine's libraries while also being displaced?
In the beginning of the war in March and April, really I moved to Lviv with my children. I have two sons, and we spent these 2 months in Lviv. My husband returned back to my village, and actually, my village was very close to the occupied territories in the beginning of war. But afterwards, in May, I returned with my family, and now I'm home. I'm very happy to be at home, despite the fact that the alarms are for 5, 6 days, times per day. And in my village, we had two times of bombing also near my village. But it's better to stay at home. As to my work, I was helping libraries already for 7 years. So this my like mission of my of my nowadays life. And of course, when the war started, from the first days, I thought, how can I help librarians and libraries in this situation? And we managed to do the fund for supporting the libraries who came from these occupied territories and so on. And we collected about 400,000 hryvnias. It's about 10 or 12 thousand dollars, and gave them to distributed to 200 librarians for example, for moving from their occupied towns, and for some medicine and so on. So for me, it's how to say, it's important because we know that now the war is not only for the territories but for culture and identity, and libraries are precisely those places for culture, learning, awareness of our identity. And also we have testimony that teachers are the first to be shot, unfortunately. And in the occupied territories, the Russians forces children and students to study Russian at school, Russian history, and so on. And they destroy, as I said, Ukrainian books. So that's why this war for culture is very important, and I'm doing my best, to do something in this case and to help libraries and librarians. And also now we will have partnership with the Library Association from US and the Association of Book Publishers. They are collecting donations also in US to help our publishers and librarians as well. And so we are helping to distribute these collected donations.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing the story. It's really interesting and impactful. It's really interesting to see how libraries are turning into community hubs and providing resources to internally displaced Ukrainians. Thank you for.
Can I add? I'm
Oh,
sorry, can
yeah.
I add? I forgot to say about also one activity that libraries do for armed forces. They are waving this camouflage nets, so making these nets, and almost every library in big city or in small village, they are doing this, and children engage in this work. And for example, my children also, they are sometimes they go to library and making this nets.
The entire community is stepping up to support Ukraine. It's wonderful to see. Let's next talk with Katarina Musienko. She is the advisor to the European Parliament and a Kremenchuk City Council member. Katarina, you have been working to support Ukraine in a variety of ways. Um, let's talk about that. But first, could you tell me about the humanitarian situation in your community? How have you and your colleagues worked to help internally displaced Ukrainians?
First of all, thank you very much for arranging these conversations, and it's a great pleasure being here with these distinguished women from Ukraine, and not only from Ukraine. I want to say, first of all, that Ukrainian women, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, became fighters. It is important because all roles got mixed. There were no more men's issue or women issue. Women suddenly learned why we need F-16s, fighter jets, what is the difference between Leopard tank and Abrams tank, what are the calibers of ammunition we need, and so many other things. So in addition to their everyday roles, we've got so many additional roles. In my community, Kremenchuk community, in the first days of the full-scale invasion, 12 women went to the front line without prior military experience, without any prior knowledge, but because we were so united by the aim to support the country and to achieve the victory. So it's very important that the population is very united nowadays. In Kremenchuk, we had before the full-scale invasion around 220,000 population, but now we see that up to today we have around 32,000 people as internally displaced, whom we hosted in our community. And from this number, we have around 7,000 children and around 1,500 people with different disabilities who need a special medical care and assistance. And of course, it's a large number, and it's quite difficult for the communities because we need to ensure that these people live their lives humanitarian, but only to have also to have socialization, to be involved in the social structure, to receive medical care. So from the beginning of the war, we were doing a lot of things. We have this organization, Ukraine Development Center, but not only. So we tried to give these people a shelter, to provide most essential things as food, as, for example, medicine also, to give them generators as well. But it goes also far beyond this. Of course, all the pressure in the first days and weeks of war was on the shoulders of the communities. There were no central regulations what to do in times of war, what to prepare, what should be our actions. So it was the council, the business, the civil society, the experts who really took a lead in this process. And everything was created in those days. So we didn't have any solutions prepared. So the cooperation was and is amazing between all the sectors. So people try to contribute. But of course, it is not enough because we do not have enough resources. So we always ask international community to provide more help. In winter, we asked for generators. Now we really ask for housing help because we need to make renovations in the old buildings. We need to buy modular houses. People are coming from Kharkiv region, from eastern part of Ukraine, because unfortunately the war is still not over. And we see that Russia is doing mobilization again. They're preparing for the war of attrition, and it means that even more people will come. And it's important because people do not want to leave Ukraine. They relocate inside Ukraine, they bring also their children, but they're still willing to work and to live in their country. So in this case, it's also important to see for the future, and to give these people opportunities to integrate in the society. For example, to find new jobs, to open new businesses. So it goes way beyond just humanitarian assistance as food, clothes, and medicine. It goes for the opportunities to establish businesses, to learn something new, and to be a part of the community. And that's what we do. We try to facilitate through the webinars, through international partnerships, and through travel and also abroad, bringing specialist mayors to the European Union just to exchange the experience.
You said that 7,000 children came to Kremenchuk. How are you providing for their education? How has the city been able to adjust to that influx of numbers from so many?
It is, of course, very difficult and comprehensive question because, first of all, we always have these alarms and sirens, and we do not have enough shelters in our buildings. So the education, even for children whom we already had in our community, it's a very difficult process because we need to ensure that in each and every school we have equipped shelter, and we do not have to secure that. So of course we are working now with partners to create some solutions for online learning, to equip our schools with special techniques, as for example PCs and laptops, special equipment for the teachers as well. We learned something during the pandemic, so our teachers, for example, already adjusted to this online learning process, but we still do not have enough equipment also for children with 2-3 children in the family, for example. Then they need more than one laptop because they have classes simultaneously. So we always ask our international partners to help, and just recently we received some help from Taiwan, for example, who are also leading in technologies and who decided to donate some equipment. But of course it's not enough, and the number is growing. So this is one thing what everyone can do, is donate the old laptop or something to Ukrainian children.
Partnerships, I think, are going to be key in all of this. You created a network of mayors across the EU that helped Ukraine survive winter. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, the network is actually a big name for this initiative. It started all in Paris because we visited with a number of members of different parliaments, and we just talked about needs of Ukrainians. And at that time, it was about generators, because as we all know, Russia brutally attacked critical infrastructure in Ukraine, and we had several blackouts of power. So we just called for help, and Association of Mayors of France started also to support the idea. And some partner NGO in France also shared our call among different communities and cities. And that was the beginning. Several mayors from different municipalities in France responded and sent generators to Ukraine. We were able to secure generators for more than 40 communities across Ukraine. And also, then it was like an example, and it goes wider because Belgian partners also support this initiative. We recently had a visit of Flemish part of Belgium to Volyn region, Lutsk, who brought also very special generators value up to $2 million who can work for critical infrastructure. Then also German partners provided generators. So it works like this: when you have 1-2 people who really support the idea, and it goes beyond to different cities and towns and countries, and then there is already a network of people who want to support. But our idea also is not to stop with generators. Generators, it's of course very important need nowadays, but we are talking about partnerships and relations for the future. We need to ensure that the cities cooperate. Integration of Ukraine starts from cities, starts from people on the ground who establish their connections. For us now, it's important to connect those cities who donated money and who bought generators for Ukrainian community with these communities on the ground, and to establish long-term partnerships, because we are looking now already into reconstruction process. We are looking also into the integration into the European Union process. And in this way, we cannot just sit and wait when it comes from above, from the central authorities. We need to act now. And we see that this partnership works, that people can exchange, do different forums, also online. It's very important to keep this process ongoing, and we are currently working on that.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the partnerships that are developing and how people and communities and countries, cities all over the place, stepping up. As an advisor to the European Parliament, can you talk to us about your work on the United for Ukraine initiative?
That's again about networking, and this is very important because since the beginning of the invasion, we just realized that sometimes national parliaments receive even more information than European Parliament, and this was the idea why we should unite and exchange information. So we just opened the call to different parliaments across the European Union to join our informal network to exchange messages. So we did working groups, for example, working group on sanctions, working group on weapons, on reconstruction, on the special tribunal, where members of different parliaments can connect and discuss topics. And currently we have in the network more than 500 members of the parliaments from countries. So now it is also wider than only European Union. We have now also United States, we have United Kingdom, we have some different countries. Even Micronesia, a tiny island, is on board with 5 members of the parliament. So we've seen how it can work, and also we have several formats. For example, we do these advocacy visits and we visit Ukraine. We did already 7 of them. The most recent one took place several weeks ago when the 15 foreign affairs from the European Union came to Kiev, and they had a number of meetings. They visited also Irpin, Bucha, and this is something which really changes people's minds, because when you even read in the news, you watch on TV, but when you are on the ground and you speak to the people and you see with your own eyes the evidence of this genocide committed, the war crimes committed in Bucha, Irpin, other places, when you see the level of destructions, then I think it influences very much understanding of these people, and they come back to their countries and they do advocacy and they promote different things for Ukraine. So that's why it is important. Some of them also go to the capitals, as for example Paris, Germany, Stockholm, and they bring messages from Ukraine to those capitals, and they also deliver the messages from Ukraine. I think it's a very efficient structure, and it continues to grow. Now we have also around 600 experts as a second level of this network from different think tanks, foundations. We have Atlantic Council, we have Chatham House on board, who exchange their expertise when they publish papers about reconstruction, sanctions, or some different topics. They circulate those papers in the network, and it is also beneficial for the members of the parliaments and for other experts. So for us, I think the core is connection and communication, because in this world, when we have massive Russian propaganda, as Luciana also said, we have this Russian ideology, when the people forced and children forced to learn Russian language, Russian history, we need to communicate our messages. And the best way is to be on the ground. Also for Ukrainian people, because when these members come to our communities, people see the real support, they see the real faces, and I think it encourages our population, our citizens, and it gives them hope for the better future, for the hope for the sooner victory. So I think it's also important because it keeps the spirit of the people up.
Absolutely. I think, and also to your point, reconstruction is very much going to be a multinational approach, but also it's going to be an internal something that's going to happen internally. And with that, I'd like to turn the conversation once again to Anna Bondarenko. She's the founder and the head of the Ukrainian Volunteer Service. Anna, thank you for joining us today. Your passion for volunteerism is very interesting. Where does that stem from?
Well, thank you for inviting me and having me today here. And for me, actually, my first volunteer experience happened 12 years ago. And it was the time when I was an exchange student. I was living in a small city of Jamestown, California. And that was a really small city, so there was not much to do there. And one of the options that I was offered at my school was actually to volunteer. And I remember how during the first times I volunteered, worked at the local church, volunteered at the local park, I remember this feeling of unity, of this huge support of the volunteer community. And that was something I really loved. And when I came back to Ukraine after a year in the United States, I actually decided, to go on and to continue volunteering and to start volunteering in my own city of Odessa, the city on the Black Sea. And at that point, I started to volunteer in Ukraine. Together with a team of volunteers, we organized a huge festival on the Independence Day of Ukraine in order to show the beauty of Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian music, Ukrainian traditions, and all kinds, of Ukrainian history and arts, and culture. So yeah, that's how I started. And then after the Evolution of Dignity, a lot of people had no other choice other than to start to look for volunteer opportunities. And that's how we started, to develop a volunteer community first in Odessa, then in Kiev. And then we decided to go through the whole Ukraine and to promote the culture of volunteering in every single city of Ukraine.
So how does your organization work? How does it serve Ukraine and inspire volunteerism?
So basically, as Ukrainian Volunteer Service, we are a national organization that which main goal is to develop the culture of volunteering so that every person in Ukraine has a chance to volunteer. And when we say every person, we actually do mean that, because in our community, you have volunteers who are 15, 16, 20, 40, 82 years old. We have volunteers with a huge previous professional background, and we also have high school students, and university students who just start to develop their own. We have people with different political views, religious views, different ethnicities, and our goal is to bring those people together, is to network them with local volunteer groups, and to help them get engaged and develop themselves through volunteering. And basically, we work in several directions. So first of all, we are a matching point for all those who want to help. And when you Google volunteering, first 10 links on internet are usually us. It's either Ukrainian Volunteer Service or National Volunteer Platform, which we have established with the Ministry of Youth and Sports. And we help together the needs of organizations. And then we showcase those needs and try to match them with the people who are ready to help. On the other hand, we're doing a lot of education. So we realize that people who just started to volunteer, they need a lot of support. They need a lot of education on how to volunteer safely, how to do the job. Especially with the full-scale invasion, we pay a huge attention to the safety of volunteers. And we had just launched an online course on how to volunteer safely, how to prevent yourself from physical harm, psychological harm, and be safe while you're volunteering. But also we teach a lot of volunteer management. We teach a lot of how to work with the beneficiaries, how to provide help, how to work on the front line. And of course, the last but not the least, we develop volunteer communities and we support volunteer communities all around Ukraine. We have these amazing groups of volunteers all around the country, both in the big cities like Lviv or Odessa or Kharkiv, but also we have volunteer communities in small cities like Ostrov, Horishny Plavny, Berdichev. And in those small cities, we support volunteers with our educational opportunities, with local finances, so they can implement local projects, with psychological support. We have lawyers who help them launch their own organizations. So basically, we do everything to support them in what they're already doing in a humanitarian way. And I'm really proud that with the full-scale invasion, we also started to support the volunteers who are right now in the occupied territories. Because from what we see in the occupied territories, Russians are targeting, first of all, they're targeting soldiers or former soldiers, of course. But the second ones are actually volunteers, all these active people who are doing something. And they are interrogating them, they're forcing them, to switch to Russian, to work for Russians. But still, in the occupation, right now, there are volunteers who are still doing the job, who are providing medicine and food for people who don't have any money, for the elderly people, for families in need. And we support this network in the occupied territories, and we try to help those people, to stay safe, but also to be able to support the civilians who don't get any support, from the Russians who took over the city.
Have you seen an influx of people volunteering with your organization during the war? And how are Ukrainians volunteering?
Well, actually, we did. And just a few weeks before the full-scale invasion, we started to mobilize volunteers, to get information from possible doctors or drivers, or people who know what to do with kids and whatever. But since the full-scale invasion, only through our community, more than 200,000 people have joined volunteering activities. More than 200,000 people joined us, and through us, they engage in local initiatives. And there's just so many ways in what people volunteer. So we see that people do a lot of online volunteering, providing online medical consultations, providing online support, working as volunteers on the hotlines. We see a lot of volunteers who help in a local humanitarian centers, which are usually based on libraries or youth centers. So people work with a humanitarian aid, they talk to people. We see a lot of lawyers, designers, psychology experts who started to provide psychological and psycho-emotional support to people in need, especially the ones who have been escaped from the occupation. And of course, we see this huge movement of people who are fundraising for our army, for civilians, people who build logistics, to be able to bring support to the frontline territories and to our defenders. And to my personal belief, this is one of the most important things we as Ukrainians and we at the whole world can do, is to support people who are fighting on the front line. Because of course, thousands of civilians are suffering, thousands of kids, of elderly people, they are in need. But the only way to stop it, the only way, to help them is actually to help Ukraine win the war. And when we help our defenders, the people who are on the front line, when we help them with drones, with different equipment, when we help them with logistics, with cars, we actually, help civilians in a long-term perspective. So this is also a huge number of volunteers right now are involved, and we are really proud to be able, to support those people and to help them do their job better.
Yeah, 200,000 volunteers. That's a massive number. You should be very proud of yourself for being able to organize so many people. For people who don't know, what are the current needs for volunteering in Ukraine?
There are a lot of needs, and basically, if a person wants to volunteer, the first question we should ask ourselves is, what skills, what unique competences do I have? What is my superpower? What is that thing that I can do the best? And how much time, am I ready to invest into this? Because right now we see that volunteers are actually needed in so many different directions. We do need a lot of people with medicine expertise, people who are professional medics, doctors, who are needed both for civilians and for the soldiers. We do need a lot of people who are ready to take responsibility and be a manager. And that is one of the biggest needs, on the ground in big and small cities, people who are ready to join those volunteer movements, and become leaders for a group of volunteers. And there, it doesn't matter what type of volunteering it is, but there is a huge need of people, who are ready to coordinate 10, 20, 30 other volunteers, to teach them, to say them what is needed to do. Of course, still a huge volunteering direction is evacuation. There are hundreds of volunteers who are working, as drivers, the ones who are bringing help to the frontline territories, but also helping people to evacuate and then put them in shelter, provide support, and just check in and chat how those people are doing. And of course, the last but not the least, working with kids, with teenagers, with adolescents, that is really important, because we see how people who are right now 10, 15, 16 years old, basically they have little access to education. They often have their parents, or brothers or sisters fighting on the front line, and they just need someone, to be there for them, either to support them, to do some crafts, to have some club, soccer club, for example. And that is also something a volunteer can do. Just to start a soccer club in a village, or start an arts, club, or movies club, just to support people, informally, but help those kids, those teenagers, to get through the war with faith, and with inner power.
Absolutely. I'm sure your organization has had immense impact. Do you have any feel-good stories that show how you've created change for Ukraine?
Well, honestly, there are a lot of stories, and I really hope, one day after the victory of Ukraine, we will just, either have a conference or just write a book, showcasing all those stories of amazing people on the ground who just took responsibility and started, to help others. But actually, from my personal point of view, one of the stories that I love the most, those are the stories of our volunteers who are right now in the occupied territories. And the reason why I love those stories is that although those people, they have never volunteered before the full-scale invasion. They have never, did something for the community. They have never been, civil society activists. They cannot, speak professionally about democracy or human rights or all this international law. But they basically started during the first days of the occupation. They started to make this informal contacts with other volunteers, making chats in WhatsApp just to exchange information. And then they started to collect money in order to help the people in their cities. And we've seen so many cases when Russian forces, they interrogated those volunteers. They took them and they had, they tried to make those people stop. They even kidnapped some of our volunteers. And unfortunately, we have several volunteers who are right now being taken hostage by Russians. And we don't have any information about their whereabouts. But still, those people in occupation, even though they know that they can be taken by Russians anytime, they still continue to buy groceries, to buy medicine, to help the families with kids. They coordinate their work, even though they know that Russian soldier tomorrow can come to their house and to take them, and they will not be able to help. And I think, this gives a huge feeling of unity, but also this really strengths. Because even though the life is really challenging, and it has been really challenging for the last year, we have so many cases, of people being really strong despite all of those challenges. And I think that it's really important, to remember about those people, to say thank you to those people, and to look for ways to support them, in Ukraine, outside of Ukraine, but to be there with them, and to share all those challenges together.
I think your work it speaks to how indomitable the spirit of Ukrainians are, despite all the obstacles. How determined they are to support their fellow Ukrainians and win this war. We're nearing the end of our time, so let's share some final thoughts. Luciana, final thought. What should people know about the desecration of Ukrainian heritage by Russia? And what should people remember about the women of Ukraine?
Thank you really for this conversation. And I want to say that war in Ukraine is a war for our cultural identity and for our nation. And Russia wants to destroy Ukrainians and our culture, and the whole world must preserve it because our culture has 1,000-year roots, and it is unacceptable in 21st century to destroy the culture heritage of such kind of nation. So we should unite and help Ukraine to gain victory.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Katerina, what does the future of your community look like? And what does your city and country need to rebuild?
Well, first to rebuild, we need to win the war. So, of course, weapons, and weapons. This is the core. And then, of course, reconstruction, I think, for my community and for every Ukrainian is, first of all, reconstruction of justice, because we need a special tribunal. We need to hold these people accountable for the crimes they committed. Then reconstruction of our society, because each and every community experience the problems, for example, of soldiers coming back home who need rehabilitation, who need psychologists to work with, who need special hospitals. So this is also important part. And when it comes to reconstruction of the buildings, of course, the damages are big, but we are very optimistic. And I think women will be really on the front line of the economic reconstruction, because women now, even now already building businesses, building different initiatives. So they're trying to generate reconstruction also within the country, not only expecting partners to help. So reconstruction for us, I think it's not a donation, it's about cooperation. It's not about how many bridges you will build and how much it will cost, but it's about this cooperation which builds long-term relationship. We are going to the European Union and we want to build back better with this formula that we're not just rebuilding our hospital in Kremenchuk, we're not just rebuilding the shopping mall, which was, by the way, destroyed completely by Russians. And it's a shopping mall where was 1,000 people inside. So we had a very enormous, losses and injured people. So it's not only about buildings, but it's about how to build with innovations, how to rebuild with new technologies, how make Ukraine more modern. So I think we are all optimistic. We have hope, we have good projects, we have young people who stay in Ukraine, who work for Ukraine, we have new innovative solutions. So I think the future of my community in Ukraine is very optimistic. We know our needs, we know our priorities, we know that we need to build houses, we know that we need to rebuild fabrics, critical infrastructure, but also to build and implement innovations.
Thank you. And Anna, what does the future of Ukraine look like, and how can creating a culture of volunteerism support that?
Well, I think that the culture of volunteerism has become a part of our DNA as Ukrainians, and not just through the last year, but through all of the years we've had before. You know, with each challenge, either it was the revolution of dignity on the start of the war 9 years ago, or the COVID, or the full-scale invasion that happened last year, all of those challenges actually made people more and more active. And I believe that what happens right now with the volunteering in Ukraine is actually that thousands of people are learning to practice democracy and not realizing that what they're doing is actually a democracy. And I'm feeling really optimistic about Ukraine after the victory, because all those people who has just started volunteering, who has just started, to be an active member of the community, after the victory, they will join the force of those who will be making reforms, rebuilding the country, joining the nonprofit and charitable organizations, basically doing the job of reimagining Ukraine and making Ukraine a stronger state. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about that. But again, the first task right now for any person in Ukraine is to help to win the war. And that is the first goal. And you don't have to be Ukrainian, in order to help Ukraine. You don't have to be on the front line in order to help the soldiers. Every person can do something, and no matter how small or big this act is, it is really important that every person does a little in order to make the victory closer. Because still, every day we're losing people, we're losing amazing civilians, we're losing amazing soldiers and people who should have been there to rebuild Ukraine. So our first task is to win the war, and our second task is to reimagine and make Ukraine stronger.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this part of our panel. I would like to thank our women warriors who are here and gave their time today. Your stories are impactful and important. Thank you for all that you're doing for your country. You're saving lives and changing the world. If the guests in our Zoom room would hold on for just a few moments, our panel is going to switch from this platform to Zoom, where they can join in the breakout rooms. Panelists, if you go to the link that we gave you earlier, we'll let you into the next part of the discussion. Thank you again for watching Views from Ukraine. Please join us on April 5th for a deeper discussion about the cultural heritage of Ukraine. Good night.